In this video, I'm going to show you how I made this vault box. The design uses a series of gears to transfer rotation from the center handle to the large gear below, which is connected to the bolt using a series of linkages. Turning the handle counterclockwise retracts the bolts, and I love how you can see all the different pieces moving together. This is mostly 3D printed, aside from one bearing and some 5mm metal dowels, and all of the files are available for free on Printables and MakerWorld if you want to build one for yourself, so check the description below for links. So that's enough talking, let's get into it. I'm going to start the assembly process with this frame piece, but the process actually began yesterday when I glued together these two frame pieces with super glue and secured them with clamps while it's set. I then used JB Weld to glue in these 5 metal dowels, which were held in place by this jig while the epoxy dried overnight. So I'm left with a nice clean frame, and I know that these dowels are square. The first piece I'm going to add to this frame is the central gear, which is made up of 2 pieces held together by glue, and the whole thing is secured by a bearing. So I'm going to add a few drops of glue to this piece that has the pegs on it, and they'll slide together. Now I'm going to take the bearing and add it to the gear itself. Just snap it in. And then I'm going to add it to this frame. So if you look closely, you'll see that there's a little protrusion there which is going to act as a stop. And there's a cutout in this gear that needs to align with that stop. So get those aligned and press on the gear. These 4 gears go onto the dowels, and the orientation is very important. So make sure that this central gear is rotated counterclockwise until it hits that stop. And then we're going to take this gear and align this edge with a stop near the dowel. And if you're really careful, you should be able to get it where the gear is right against that stop, and it will mesh in with the teeth perfectly. So if you look carefully, you can see that little bump. And if we rotate this central gear, you can see that it rotates, but the motion is limited. So now I'm going to do the same thing with all 4 gears. Next, I'm going to add in these bolts, which are made up of 4 pieces, and I assembled them earlier. The bolt pin is glued into the bolt, then I added an arm over the little peg and glued in the bolt pin cap to hold everything together. It's a bit tedious, but it makes for a strong linkage, and it makes sure that no glue gets near any of the moving parts so they don't accidentally get glued together. So as I mentioned earlier, the orientation of these gears is really important. And when you rotate this central gear counterclockwise until it hits that stop, that puts everything in the position where the bolts are retracted. So as we add these bolts, I'm just going to loop it onto any one of these arms in the center and then find a slot where the bolt is retracted, just like that. So if you do a quick test, you'll see the bolt will extend and retract. So that looks good, and now I'm just going to add all 12. With the bolts installed, we're going to add these rings to keep them in place. It's easier to add glue to the frame itself rather than the rings, and I'll start with this inner ring and add glue at each of the connection points. This piece is omnidirectional, so no special alignment is necessary. Just make sure you're careful with the glue. This outer ring goes on next, and it only has one correct orientation, but it's impossible to put on the wrong way. So if you look at it closely, you can see these walls, and as you go around, there are 2 walls which are a little bit shorter, and those are going to align with the frame where you can see there are 2 of these little bays that don't have the little recessed edge. So I'm going to add some glue to this frame around the perimeter and slide on the cap. Next, we're going to add these 4 gears onto the 4 corner gears on the dowels, and they have little indents in them, so they can only go on one way. So I'm going to add a little bit of glue onto these gears and then just pop them on. I added all 4 gears, and if everything was lined up correctly, you should notice a pattern where these bands in the gear align with this ring. Now I'm going to add this final gear onto this center dowel, And just like the other gears, the orientation is important because there's a stop that will prevent it from going in any direction. So I'm just going to take this and slide it onto the dowel. And, well, that was easier than it should have been. So let me just test it out. Yeah, perfect. So that's good. Now I'm going to add the hinge. The hinge comes in two pieces and they will slot together just like this. So each of these little flat pieces is going to get a drop of glue, and obviously you're going to add a little bit of glue here to glue these pieces together. Those little circles will align with the dowels on the door and hold everything together. So now, before I add this part onto the hinge, I'm going to add some glue into the recesses for the dowels, and just a little bit of glue. It doesn't take much, but my hope is that you can add a little glue into these recesses, and then when you add the final piece of the hinge, it will create a little separation between the hinge and the glue and the dowels that they're connecting to. So basically, I want the glue and the hinge to connect to the dowels on the door, but I don't want it to squirt out and get onto the gears themselves. So I'm going to take this hinge piece and align the dowels with those holes, and everything should fit together nicely. And I'm going to use clamps just to make sure that this sets well. Okay, future me here. I forgot to mention something earlier and I actually kind of messed this up, but it's still okay. Earlier, when we added this outer ring, there are two walls on the outer perimeter which are shorter than the rest. The bolt between these two walls should be at 3 o'clock on the side here, basically opposite the hinge, but I messed this up and I put it on the top instead. There is a taper basically along this entire half, with the most taper at the center here. And that's meant to give clearance when the door is closing so it doesn't bind against the jamb. And this is actually on all interior doors in real life, but I thought it'd be necessary here, but clearly you can see that this is closing no problem. So if you want to do this exactly right, the side with the shorter walls should be at 3 o'clock. The last piece to add to the door is this handle, and it prints as one piece, and I already glued in some metal dowels. These are 20 millimeters, but you can use whatever size you want. So I'm just going to add a little bit of glue and slide it into that center recess. Okay, so the door is all done and it works perfectly. It looks really good. So I'm just going to set it aside for a moment and get the box ready. The box comes in two pieces, and this big one takes forever to print, so good luck with that. And this jam piece also takes a while, but I'm just going to glue them together like that. And the bottom of the box has a few recesses for plastic feet or rubber mats or something, and then also my name. There's a big rim on the inside of the box, and I'm just going to add glue there and add the jam piece on top and let it dry. So I have two 30 millimeter metal dowels which are going to insert in the hinge, and I'm going to take the door here, slide it into place just like that, and now these dowels should slide right in. And here we have it. This project isn't overly complicated or time consuming, at least compared to some of my other projects. So if you decide to build one for yourself, please share photos on Printables or MakerWorld. I'm very pleased with how this came out, and I'm especially happy with how smooth the mechanism feels, which I think is a function of using linkages to extend the bolts instead of gears and racks, but I'm not an engineer, so let me know in the comments if I'm missing something. If you're still watching, I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you want to see more stuff like this, please hit the subscribe button. Thanks for watching.